In this podcast, we're going to be looking at the election and taking the election down and breaking it down to being where we can actually look at state by state and show where we can actually get a clear view of where things are going. We're going to be looking actually even at the 2016 election in comparison and show how that shows a little bit of an implication of how things are going to be going. And we're going to be using the site 270 to win as an actual way of showing how the election is going to play out. We're not going to be using any of the other like pundit forecasts for this. We're going to be using our own forecast to actually show the outcome. We're going to be showing it in such a way that how it's going to go and how it's going to play out. And we're going to be, first of all, we're going to be looking at one major thing, which is showing the 2016 election and showing, first of all, with it is showing that map first, as you can kind of see it. And you can see that Trump won 306 to 232. Now we go back to here with it, and first thing we're going to do is we're going to be taking every state that would be heavy leaning in either direction, and we're going to be coloring those in for their likely candidate. And the reason why we're doing this is because those are likely to flip in either side to their candidates, and it's not likely that the other side is going to win. And we need to understand this. Now, when we start to look at this into the scenario of the 2016 with it, we need to remove states that Trump did not win. And this is very, very key because when we view it, we know that he is actually a controversial figure and that he's not likely to win other ones that he actually won in he's not likely to repeat ones that he actually lost in 2016, and he's not likely to win those because of that. If he was not likely to win them in 2016, things that he has done since then, he's not likely to win now because his actions of not coming through with certain promises, which tend to anger back the people with it, certain things in which he's done, in which only keep a certain loyal following. And this is what happens with all presidents. You usually tend to lose a good amount of that loyal following when you don't come through, and you only get the ultra loyal followers, and then some party loyals that continue through, and then you have to rely on some of those independent people that will say they like you or don't. So people that basically did not vote for, states that did not vote for him in the previous election, pretty much you can guarantee are not going to vote for him now. Now, when we look at this, we can see that Nevada did not vote for him. They voted for Hillary. You can strike that off the list. When we start to look at other ones, New Mexico and Colorado did not vote for him as well. We can look at Minnesota, did not vote for him. We keep going, Illinois did not vote for him. We can see the whole strip down here, all the smaller states did not vote for him as well. We can see that Maine was split, where Maine had the states and District 1 did not vote for him. We had the state in District 1 here as well, did not vote for him. And then the last one being New Hampshire did not vote for him. And when we, as well as Vermont. Now we see New Hampshire right there that we would need to color as well. And that leaves basically the thing there. Now when we look at that, we get a point to where he has a limited output. We see that he did win Nebraska, so what we're going to do is we're going to state that he won all of Nebraska, so we're going to flip that from a light blue to a solid red. We're going to give that to him. We're going to say he's going to repeat in that. Now, when we get the rest of this, we see what he's sitting at. Now, he has to basically take a good portion of these other ones. Now, we have a few options in which we've seen happen, because we've seen if we repeat with what's happened there, we see Maine is likely to repeat there, so we'll seal that. So that makes them that makes numbers at full where you have 232 given to Biden so far and 127 to Trump, guaranteed. But now we have some ones that are within pink, light blue, and then you're completely undecided. The first thing we need to do with this is when we look at the actual outcome of it, we need to start looking at some of these states like Arizona. And for this, you're going to see that we're going to be looking at a few different ones specifically. We're going to be looking at the way Morning Consult works. Morning Consult, the last one was 48%. This was on the 22nd, 48% to 47%, and that was only 1,066 people to Trump. The previous one was 1144 for 49.46 to Biden. That was on the 13th of October. And when we go back to the previous one before, we had on September 1st was 9,443 people. That was a 52 to 42%. Now, I would tend to think that this would carry a lot more weight. You know, it's been a while with it. The other ones have been far smaller. We've seen some other larger size ones with it that have actually been pointing in the direction of Biden. And this is something overall with it. When we see overall, they're pointing in Biden by about 1.2%. Now, and when it comes down overall with Morning Consult, we can see Morning Consult was showing last election as being the most reliable. Now, Arizona seems to be looking like they're going to go in that direction. Now, people might want to look at Trafalgar Group and other ones like Spry polls with it. Now, the problem being is these two groups are actually not only directly conservative polls, which would be biased, but on top of that, they're also have been giving money to, if you look through their record, they've been giving money to conservative politicians. And this completely taints your poll because it means you're not interested in getting an actual accurate amount. And if we keep going, which is not going to give you an accurate amount with it. And if you look at Spry polls with it, I mean, if they're still getting numbers that are actually in the way of leading toward Biden. This is back in July. That means it should not be what it called. This is showing that it's not really looking well in the state of Arizona. Then when we start to look at, let's go back and let's start looking at Texas. Now, Texas is another one that's actually kind of a little bit interesting. Because traditionally Texas is not in play, but I believe due to policy is because when we look at immigration, when we look at, as we see that immigrants are three more times likely to be job creators through entrepreneurship, and we see that also through the tariffs, which have basically been killing American companies, uh, which also directly create jobs. We've seen that what it called that's been hurting essentially a main core area, and then when you see that it's basically uh, him insulting Hispanics, Trump has, and when Hispanics and whites equal about 40% for each group with it of the whole demographic, you're not going to fare very well in Texas. And when we start to view it state by state, you're going to find that an area like Texas is not going to look very well with it, where it shows Trump. They show Trump by one, but when we start to look at some of the key ones, you're going to see the last morning consult poll, which is on the 22nd, shows a 1 point win by Biden. The last Quinnipiac poll with it was actually showing a tie by Biden. The previous morning consult poll was showing a 2 point win by Trump was right before that. So when we start to look at the most recent ones, we can almost say that that thing's a dead heat in Texas, which is why when we start to look at this is pink. Now, for anybody that realizes this, they should realize that if once you win California and Texas, whichever party wins, those two states will win the election, because we're talking is there. That's 93 points between those two states. You've almost hit 100 points right there when you need 270. And when you only need 177 points more than that, it's not hard to get that. And especially from a liberal area, when you got Washington at 12, Oregon at 7, Nevada at 6, Colorado at 9, New Mexico at 5, Minnesota at 10, Illinois at 20, 29 for New York, Virginia at 13, Vermont at 3, New Hampshire at 4, 11 for Massachusetts, Rhode Island at 4, Connecticut at 7, New Jersey 14, Delaware at 3, Maryland at 10, and DC at 3. And we can actually see what actually occurs, what happens when you flip Texas right here. You see the 232. You hit 270 right there, just by doing that right there. You flip it, you flip that one blue, and the implication right there is Biden wins automatically. It does. It automatically ends the election right there, and that's why Texas being essentially right now, as we see, a coin flip, that makes that a big problem. Now we see some of the other things with it. We see Iowa. We look at Iowa. We're talking Iowa is pretty much Biden by 0.8% on the polls. When you start to look into going deeper into the polls, we want to look specifically at ones that are reliable with it. They have not had ones that are necessarily the most reliable. Ones, though, at this point, with you also want to see ones you want to remove, like Spry. Even Spry, you would have to. Even Spry is showing Spry is showing ones on the sides of Biden with it, which is not good. Now you have to look at what it called larger size pools. The last ones you had larger size pools. One was a tie from YouGov/CBS. The other one was Quinnipiac. These are the last ones of over 1,000 people, and this is for October 11th for the YouGov, and that showed them tied at 49%. And the last one before that was Quinnipiac on the 7th, and that was 1205 for people, and that showed 50% for Biden, 45 for Trump. Now this shows with it that this is not good for Iowa. and it's likely that he could be pulling Iowa. When we look at some of the other ones like Ohio, which is another split state, Ohio, it's showing Trump by a small margin there, so that flips in the other direction. Now, Morning Consults looks a good size there, about 22, 71, 49, 47. The previous Morning Consult, he won there 22, 83, 49 to 46. Previous Morning Consult was 50 to 45. But the problem being, Morning Consult was 48, 45. Though the problem being is it shows that now with these ones from Morning Consult, is it showing that Biden's getting closer in Ohio, and this is not good for Trump. Trump has essentially lost about 1% over that period, and Biden has gained 2%. Now, if Biden gains another 2%, even if Trump loses 1%, you're talking, in that case, Trump will lose an election out in Ohio. Then if we look to our next one, we see North Carolina. Now we go to North Carolina. We're seeing Biden by 1.2% is their average. Let's look at where we're looking at. If we look at the ones since October that have been run, we see Rasmussen, which is traditionally a conservative poll. He won by 1%. And Trafalgar Group, which is a group that has actually been that is definitely a conservative poll. They've actually admitted themselves they've donated to conservative opponents. If we start to throw those out and look at things like Morning Consults that have actually were the closest to the actual real election results, we go back to October 22nd, 1904 for the of likely voters, and that's 50 to 47 Biden. We go back to the previous one, which is on the 13th, 1993 of likely voters, 50 to 46. Morning Consult on the first, but they didn't give the data on it, but it was 49 to 47. So it looks like Trump is actually losing ground in the state of North Carolina. Now, this is not good either on what the polls are stating. Going down to Georgia, Georgia's another one that has actually now become a toss-up state. This one's showing Biden by 0.4, which is actually showing very, very tight. And if we're showing the last one from Morning Consult, it shows 1837 of likely voters, Trump up 49 to 47. Last one would be, they don't show the number, 49 to 46 of a Biden lead. And previous to that was 1337 of likely voters, 47-46 Biden lead. So that would be that's definitely a toss-up. Now what we need to do is go on to the last one, which is Florida. Now we see Florida, Biden up by 0.2. And if we start to look at these polls, you're going to see Morning Consult, last one is on the 22nd. That was 4,685 people, likely voters, 52-45 to Biden. Morning Consult on the 13th, 47-85. That's a 51-46. And before then, we have Morning Consult at a 37-60 with a 1.6 percentage of error. That's a 49-46 on that's 728. So those are our last three. And when we start to look at that, we can see that Biden does have a substantial lead. And especially with those poll sizes, we can actually see specifically that Biden has a massive lead. Now, the ones that have actually been showing Trump are actually ones that are actually either leaning conservative, or when we're looking at them, they're either a leaning conservative, or they're ones that are basically very, very small sample sizes. Now, mind you, you cannot really trust when they view these things as a composite, because what ends up happening is you see sample sizes that you might see, like Trump won the latest poll. There's a sample size of 400, and he won at 48-44. Well, that when you look at that sample size, that is far smaller than when you look at this on the same date, the Florida Atlantic University one, where Biden won 50-48. There was a sample size of 937. That is more than double the sample size, which as the sample size grows, the more accurate the poll is going to be. That's why when you get a sample size, let's say going back to the 22nd from Morning Consult of 4685, and it was 52-45 Biden, that is far more likely to be accurate than a sample size of 400. Or the Rasmussen poll on the 23rd that was 800, that showed Trump 49-46. Because you're talking, that is between 5 to 10 times the size in the polls. And that's very, very important to understand. As basically is with those poll numbers like that, those are very, very important when you get size. And the sample size is what matters with it. It's not the composite. That's why when we start to look at the Real Clear, when people cite the Real Clear Politics composites, those are completely irrelevant because they never account for sample sizes. And if they were to weight it by sample size, it would mean something, but they don't. They just take basically the percentages and they average them out. And that's the whole problem, is you could have one candidate that wins, like let's say out of like 10 polls, they could basically win. You have one candidate win sample sizes of like 300 people being polled, win 5 of them by like 5 points, and the other candidate could win their 5 of like sample sizes of like 3,000 and win them by like 2 points. And yet they will show that candidate that won by a huge margin with those tiny sample sizes as a clear victor in the state. Meanwhile, when you look at the actual outcome, you're going to find out that one who was expected to lose is now expected to win. That's why sample size means far more than actually when you start to look at these overall numbers of who's expected to win. And that's why I'm giving you the sample sizes here, because you need to understand how many people they're getting. If they're actually screening out a lot of people out of their sample sizes when they're giving their final numbers, because they need to screen out extreme people on both ends when they give it to you. Now, the more they screen out, the more they're likely to have problems, and but in many cases, a lot of these are not raising their margin of error when they're doing it. And some of them with it are saying that their margin of error is within the same realm as some of these large things, large polls, like such as this one from CNN poll from 10/21, in which Biden won. They had 847 for likely voters. Biden won 50-46. It was 847 for likely voters, 4% of error. Yet we find that's these Susquehanna thing that Trump won, which had 400 likely voters and a 4.9% likely of of error, and he won 48-44. Well, how can it? Well, we know that we know it's not only going to rise 0.9% when you're less than half of the actual likely voters. It's going to be far higher. This means that they're undercutting their percentage of error by a great deal, likely a couple of percent because of the because when you look at that sample size is far too small. And now when we start to look at what Trump's path to victory, now here's the thing. When we start to look at this, we can see that he needs to get into, when we look at our picture with it, now what's Trump's path to the victory? Now here's the thing. Now, if he loses Florida, like when we look at those poll numbers with it from, the thing is, when we were looking at it, if he does lose Florida, here's the thing, is that puts Biden at 261. That means that Trump would essentially have to win. He would have to take Texas, and then he has to take essentially Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, Iowa, all those flipped, then Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania to win. He has to take every one of them. Now when we start to look at going back over, we can actually go to the idea of what happens if he what happens if he does not what happens if he wins Florida? Well, that will change it as well, because that gives you a different outcome. Now, that would be the second outcome that he would have, and that's a little bit interesting in that fact. Now, if he's one to actually take Florida, now this actually changes it as well, because he would still have to basically, let's assume he takes all of these. Let me fix that. Let's assume he takes all of the toss-ups. Now, what he's stuck at with which is these 57 other points. Now, he needs to take a minimum, and he's at 249. That means he needs to take a minimum of 2 of the toss-ups. That means between Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Now, the problem being with this is that when we start to look at these 4 states, is that Arizona, when we start to look at those, is that he's not basically, he's got the one morning consult that he had in which he won with it, but all the other numbers in which every other poll that he's gone over is that has been out there, he's basically lost in Arizona, and so Arizona is not looking likely for him with it. But assuming that he can actually pull up Arizona, let's give it to him. Now he needs to win between Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Let's look at Wisconsin first. When we start to look at Wisconsin, the thing is if we look at all groups that have not had a biased poll, he has not actually won a poll since basically pretty much before the coronavirus. And for polls of 1,000 or more that we do not view as a biased poll, he has actually not won one at all with it. Every poll of 1,000 or more, basically beyond the Trafalgar group, has actually all been won by Biden. The Susquehanna group, Susquehanna, he was actually tied with that, but it makes me wonder if that's legitimate, and that's definitely very, very small. If you look at what it calls all the other polls around that, every other one has been Biden by far. Even the Trafalgar group, with it, which is definitely, they list themselves as a conservative polling house. On the October 19th, they actually listed themselves as 2% ahead for Biden. This would mean bad news for Trump in this state. So we would definitely have to declare at that point that Wisconsin is out of the mix. This means he has to win one out of the two for Michigan and Pennsylvania. Let's first view Michigan. Michigan, basically, when we start to view those with it, is he's only won the Trafalgar group polls and Spry group polls going back until basically previous to when we were basically getting hit with the coronavirus, where we were actually where it actually legitimately hit everything. And then his last one he actually won before then was basically back in November of last year, outside of those two things. So if you actually go with polls that are actually be more neutral, you'd actually see that he's actually getting killed. If you take the most recent one from Morning Consult, he's actually down by 8 points. That's on the 22nd. You take the one previous, he's actually down by 7%. So he's actually losing ground. And the Morning Consult was 17 on the 22nd, and on the 13th he was 17-10. So they were about the same size. So it shows showing he is losing a little bit of ground on Michigan as well. So he would need. So we could almost declare that Michigan is out. Now we start to view Pennsylvania is the last one. Now this is showing Biden by 3.6. This would probably be his best hope as we're looking at it. And when we start to view numbers, last one for the Morning Consult was on the 13th, 2610 for likely voters, 5244. Going before then, for Morning Consult, we see that being on the 9-1, which was 49 to 45. Before then, we see on the 728, that was 2092 with a 2.1, that was a 5042. So we can see basically it's staying at a very, very high amount. Ones in which Trump is winning is like insider advantage of 48, 46. That's a 400 people in the poll. A 48, 47, that's Spry polls, and that's 700 people. They've been caught actually giving money to candidates, including out in Florida. CNBC Change Research, that's 50 to 46. That was back in June, early June. That was actually before, I believe that would have been before his executive orders on legal immigration. The Baldwin University on the 25th of March. This would have been right around when the time it started with, and that's when he had his last one on there. And we're talking, so he has not been a huge favorite in the state. And so that would be his best hope. And he's not likely there either, because he has not really had any wins out there in meaningful polls. And that's so the closest I can actually predict for Trump is a 278 to 260 loss. Now, when we start to get to reality, is you're going to actually see it's actually a lot uglier for Trump. And I know a lot of the Trump fans are not going to be happy with this, but the fact is, when we start to get to reality, you're going to find out that it's not going to be very, very pretty. Now, I'm going to claim that Texas is going to go red. I don't. Something in me that just doesn't believe that it's ever going to go that's ever going to go blue. Now, if it does with it, I mean, what it calls, I'll say, okay, it's my fault and that's with it. But this is just more of me saying it's a gut feeling that things are just not going to happen that way. I just do not see it happening in this method. Now, what we see with it is likely that Arizona is showing all inklings that that it might go blue with it. Let's assume it goes red. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt in Arizona. We know Minnesota's not going to change and it's not going to go blue. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt in Iowa. We're going to basically say he's going to lose all those three because of the way things are going. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt in Ohio. North Carolina is just, not going his way. We're going to give him the benefit of the doubt in Georgia. And Florida's just not going his way. So at best with it, we got 322 in realistic terms. Though we could see 333 with him. We also could see numbers like where Iowa flips as well to blue, and you see that flipping. We could see 339 as well. We could see Georgia flip as well. I mean, there are numbers like that. We could also see Ohio flip. So we could see other ones like this flip as well. Now, it could be up to realistic terms as high as 373 to Biden. Though if Biden, what it called, does what is plausible, I'm not saying likely, but plausible in Texas, the highest number that he can get is 411 to 127. Now, people might ask, why would this happen? And this is because what we're finding is that this is kind of the referendum on the idea of tribalism. And like Biden or not with it, he represents the ideas against tribalism, which basically encompasses the ideas of like Bernie Sanders' socialism and Donald Trump's nationalism, and it basically goes against it. As we saw what happened with Bernie Sanders, he crashed and burned, and we're seeing what's happened with Donald Trump. Donald Trump was doing moves, was basically doing a top-down thing for the coronavirus. He was the first one to say he wanted to shut down the economy, and then to suggest it, yet he backed off of that when the states did it with it because and then wanted to blame the states. And the moment that happened with it, he didn't want to take responsibility for what his actual recommendation caused. And he kept on people that were basically damaging to the whole system. And when there was stuff that basically showed that certain people were to blame for it and for the origins of the whole thing, he was keeping them on the whole time. And the best he was doing was diminishing their role. And a lot of people were furious because of this. And this is where a lot of people are pushed away, and a lot of people have not liked the nationalist agenda. They wanted a idea of being economically conservative and getting the debt back in order and bringing the troops home. being the idea of auditing the Federal Reserve, doing things that are actually in the interest of the individual, and he's doing everything in the interest of the collective. And this is something in which we've seen in socialism, and he's all he's doing is mimicking what we did under the 1920s progressive era, and we saw how much that damaged our country and how much hatred was during that era. And that's all what he's done. And that's something in which a lot of people don't like, and a lot of people do not like any form of hatred like this. And they don't like this tribalism that we've created. So people have wanted to go away from that. And especially when we've had 12 years of this tribalism, they want it to all end. And regardless of who they voted for with it, if they voted for any of these people that actually started the tribalism, they just want it to end. And because they've never voted for that to begin with. They voted for the country to come together, not to be torn apart. They don't want an us versus them. They wanted what I call all of us in it together, to basically better our country with it. And then the idea that we're a country of immigrants, whether you can't basically just say enough's enough, we're just going to close it off and destroy the country because we don't want job creators here. And that's why we've seen this huge shift. I mean, we can even look at other numbers. I can show you. I can show numbers on. That show this. That will show on. The rise in free trade. Right there, Trump's tax on free trade actually made it more popular with voter. Thanks to a paradoxical Trump bump, there's nearly 90% of both Democrats and Republicans now say they support international trade. And this is back in a report from 8/28/2020. And if you start to look at the actual thing of when Trump was elected and where the actual thing of the actual trade support is, it's actually skyrocketed for support of free trade. Now you would think theoretically, if he was actually, if there was actually a support for all these sanctions and all these tariffs, that theoretically that would actually end. Well, the fact is we've actually seen the actual opposite effect happen. People have actually seen the damage of tariffs, and actually that's actually occurred. Now, what has actually happened with it? We've seen many of these countries, many of these states, such as a lot of the areas, such they were rely on a lot of these things, such as Texas relies on a lot of it. That's why Texas is most likely pink, because they're a major shipping location. You see Arizona is a major shipping location as well. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio are all these four are actually major locations in which things are being done for these in these locations in which they're shipping things overseas. We're seeing North Carolina as well. That's why North Carolina is leaning toward a Biden as well. That's why when we start to look at realistic maps, we can actually see that Iowa has a lot of farmers as well. We're seeing Georgia actually has a lot of shipping, as well as Florida. Florida isn't just a lot of isn't just a lot of tourism, but tourism has been obliterated by the lack of immigration as well. And when you stop these things, you're hurting the actual country, and you're finding that many of these things are actually obliterating it. And when you start attacking it, this is what ends up happening. And Colorado was normally tended to be a purple state, is now voting against him because he's creating this whole idea of this enhanced war on drugs that is probably the harshest of probably some of most of these nationalist leaders globally. And this has been kind of what's unified them. And it's something that doesn't work. And Colorado is completely against it. Colorado is actually where the Libertarian Party was founded. And since they believe against it, they understand how much it destroys families, it destroys countries, it puts countries basically going into Marxism, and puts basic countries into basically where they have Marxist drug cartels in power. And eventually those cartels become, in many cases, political parties, like we see in Colombia. And this is why when we start to look at the actual electoral map with it, why they're going away from it. Now it's because they just want to end that type of attitude. And with Biden promising to basically at least wind down some of these things with it, I think that that's a little bit of a positive. And I think that's why they're going with it, because they basically made it to where third parties do not even have rights on the political spectrum with it. I think that's why people are a little bit scared to vote for a third party. And I think that's where we're at. And if at least on the national elections when it comes down to the president, because if they were, I mean, we would seriously have states in which you would have them win. I think there's fear of them not getting enough votes with it, or letting a poor candidate win, and in their minds having a poor candidate win. So people had this in their minds that a lesser of two evils would win. I think that's part of the problem as well. But they view essentially, at least a stopgap of Biden would essentially, this is in many Republicans' eyes, a stopgap of Biden would at least get to some normalcy in conservatism, potentially lead to a libertarian conservative candidate, and nationalism, national conservatism, on as having any type of grasp on politics within America and try to kill it, just like the Democrats have essentially done it to expose some of the things in their party, to expose some of the negatives on socialism. And they've allowed some of the more sane policies to kind of push forward, and let the insane policies die out, which it kind of, by like exposing some of the tactics that Bernie Sanders would do to get elected, what he would do if getting elected, which is using violence to pursue his actions if people refuse to comply. And I think that's where we're at. And we find the same thing on the other side, that you refuse to comply, they will use violence. On the nationalists will use violence as well. And I think that's where we're at right now, is people want some type of normalcy in which you can have political discourse without trying to bring a bike chain to someone's head. And I think people want to just move on with their lives and get past this. And with this, I'm probably just going to end it here with it and kind of show where we've been with it, because I think the big things with it, with this election, that are going to be on the whole thing with it, is really it has nothing to do with COVID-19, but rather the economy. And the economy is impacted by two things, is tariffs and immigration. And I think basically the failure to uphold the immigration laws and try to actually hold them back has actually hurt the economy, as well as tariffs have actually obliterated them. And we find that what it called that that even Mike Pence, who once was against tariffs and thought they were appalling, has what it called has really gone and basically brown nosed the president now and says, "Oh, tariffs are great," and go with this America First agenda, which is really America Last. And we find that they've totally backpedaled on the whole thing with it, and we only have a few people in Congress that are really willing to stand up to the president when these things are hurting America. And when it comes down to everything, they're not willing to actually. Most of them aren't willing to stand up to it. And you're finding a lot of them, like Hawley and Cotton, are just what it call essentially doubling down and going right into it. And they're actually willing to continue these policies that are hurting people. That's Hawley out of Missouri and Cotton out of Arkansas. That's right in here with it. Now, those are areas with it that have been horribly hurt by these policies. And yet, what it calls Hawley's still in there with it. Cotton's in an election with it. And Cotton felt so much of his of the people of Arkansas that he felt that he didn't need to even show up to it, show up to the only debate. That he felt so well of the people of Arkansas. Now I'm hoping that people of Arkansas are smart enough to basically say, you know what, Cotton, if you feel so little of us that you don't even need to show up for a debate, that they're going to vote him out, and hopefully they do, because if they do with it, they're actually going to get a better representative being a libertarian, because the libertarian's going to actually look out for them, because they're going to be economically conservative and socially liberal, which is going to represent both conservatives and liberals in the state equally, and not just basically going to be representing a small margin of these national conservatives that don't even represent that doesn't even represent the actual traditional conservatives that are in the state. It only represents a small margin of these nationalists, which are not even 10% of conservatives. So basically, I mean, if you're a conservative in Arkansas, whether you should think about voting for Harrington, because the fact is, it's going to be better off for you if you're a Democrat. Get out and vote for Harrington. If you're if you're for any other third party with it, vote for Harrington, because he's the only thing on the list with it, and he'll at least get you something on there that you're probably going to be interested in. Um, and that's basically about it with it, and that I'm going to be discussing the video with it. This is I think this is very important for people to understand that this is where politics is really going with it, and they need to understand that basically is when you vote for liberty with it, you're going to get basically the best of both worlds. You're not going to have to choose between one or the other. And this is the end, and I will see you guys whenever I do my next video, and bye everyone.